Power Podcast.
Hello. We are back. We are here to make some magic happen. And hope you guys enjoyed the All-Star game. I thought it was a wonderful event. And, look, let's just start there, shall we? Look, what can you say? The slam dunk competition. Aaron Gordon, once again, puts up just an epic and one would argue magical performance for the ages again, and comes away without the title. This one is a little difficult for me. I really understood why he lost fight against Zach LaVine in 2016. I understood perfectly well why many people felt he was robbed. I got it. I understood it. Made perfect sense to me. This one, the level of difficulty with Derrick Jones was extraordinary. And look, I say that as if Aaron Gordon didn't do anything extraordinary hard, and he did. But man, it was a sight to behold. Here's the crazy thing about the slam dunk competition. There was a period of time where it had begun to be so dry, because we just didn't have these magical moments. We had, Michael, Dominique, sprinkle a little bit of Harold Miner in there. But for the most part, the slam dunk competition really didn't have that moment. And then Vince Carter came, and we said, oh, okay, this is what we've been missing. And then 2016, Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon, and it was magical, let me tell you. Aaron Gordon says he's probably not going to try and go back into the slam competition, and that is incredibly sad. It's crazy when you think about it. It really is. If you look at slam dunk history in the competition, and somebody said to you, who is the top 5 dunkers in the slam dunk competition? Actually, you could say who's the top 3 slam dunk competition performers. One could easily put Aaron Gordon there. His 2 years of dunks are arguably some of the greatest in NBA history. It's extraordinary. It really is. For him not to have a title is almost criminal at this point. But Zach LaVine, windmilling, free throw between the legs. Zach LaVine was doing incredibly crazy stuff as well. So he lost. And you got the sense he got robbed there, but it was like, okay, next time. Now this time, I was okay with the Zach LaVine. I was like, look, he lost to Zach LaVine. I said, man, that's really tough. I gave it to him just because I think he did beat Zach LaVine. But this Derrick Jones deal, man, let me tell you, I don't know, man. I really don't. Derrick Jones arguably is one of the best leapers the NBA has ever had, and that's incredibly crazy to say. You're talking about Vince Carter, Dominique, Michael Jordan, David Thompson. This guy is up there, man. When he gets up in the air, it's literally postered. It is incredible. He literally levitates. I haven't seen anything like it. Everybody's saying, like, who's the top 3 dunk competitions of all time? And it's tough to say. 1988 Jordans versus Neek, I have to put that number 1 because that, to me, created this fervor for Michael Jordan. It solidified Dominique as if he needed further validation. But, there are still people to this day that think Dominique was robbed on that one, that Michael Jordan shouldn't have won. But I'm torn at number 2. Number 2 is either this year or 2016. I don't know. But man, it's criminal. It's criminal. It really is. I know I keep saying that, but your heart just goes out to it because, this guy literally put up what is it, 450s, 550s or something like that, I believe, and still lost. It's incredible. It goes to the strength of the slam dunk competition, and hopefully this further takes it to the next level. I don't know how they're going to take it any further, but man, it's incredible. It really is. Then there's the NBA All-Star Game, and man, that was a beautiful, beautiful affair. It is something that the All-Star Game has not really been able to tap into for quite some time, and that is the competitive value of that game. They instituted this year the Elam Ending, in which in the fourth quarter they turned the game clock off, added 24 points to honor Kobe Bryant to the leading team score after the first three quarters, and then that went to the target score, which was 157. So whoever basically was the first to go to 157 won the game. They did not credit it, but really this is the Elam Ending, and this was a rule. Well, I can't say a rule, but a mathematical pursuit that was concocted by Dr. Nick Elam. He's a professor at Ball State, an avid college basketball fan, and basically he felt at the end of each game that the competitive value of the games was lessened because of the milking of the ball and the fouls, and he thinks it should have kept its, high-paced, constant movement, that the game should be more and more exciting even at the end of the game. So he devised this idea. Most notably, it was in the basketball tournament that was played during the summer last year, in which they added 8 points to the leading team score, and then that became the target score for the game, and they turned off the clock. It was huge hit on Twitter. I give the NBA a ton of credit because they didn't have to do this. They clearly wanted this to be something special, and they were open to changing things. And you got to give the NBA credit this. This is one of the reasons why the NBA continues to be the gold standard among sports leagues. It has everything to do with the openness to say, look, if we don't have it right, let's get it right. And I guess at the end of the day, that is about leadership. They really went out of their way this year to try to figure out how to make this work. And man, what an impressive product they produced this past weekend. It was beautiful. It really was. You had the 3-point competition, and most notably, the beautiful thing that we saw was another big man winning the skills competition. It was one of those things where you sit there and you say to yourself, man, this could not happen, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. You wouldn't have seen big men be able to do these skill competitions the way they are now. And essentially what's happened is the NBA has transformed centers, and I think we're starting to see that progression now with centers in which they're doing everything and more than the predecessors before them. So, I know it becomes frustrating to see at times the NBA's lack of willingness to allow big men to play a traditional game, but you cannot argue that they are producing some of the most skilled big men that we've ever seen. It's definitely happening. It, to me, reminds me of the concept of evolution, and that even though you have some leftovers from a time in which the center position was powerful, and it still is powerful, but I mean, the center position is vastly different than it was. And I'll give you a point of what I'm talking about here. So Dwight Howard and DeAndre Jordan, those guys are kind of like crocodiles. They're not dinosaurs, but they are prehistoric. And I mean that in the grandest of terms. They have been able to stay in this game despite the fact that the game has changed a little bit away from what their skill sets are, because we have changed the game to be much more diverse with skill And these guys are still holding on. Now, during this time, some guys like Roy Hibbert did not have the ability to adjust. And, that was a true dinosaur. That dinosaur, if you didn't have the ability to change your game, you were unfortunately, you went extinct. Even guys who I guess you could beckon to that of a Willie Mammoth, meaning like they're probably as far as they'll go in evolution, but they did make the transcendent step to changing their skill sets. Guys like Brook Lopez. I mean, you have to give it up to Brook Lopez. He really changed himself and became a 3-point shooter, and it extended his career as a result. If he did not do that, who knows? He probably would have found himself in a position sort of like Roy Hibbert. Robin Lopez and others are still there too. They're still playing their prospective games, but the value isn't like it used to be. It just isn't. We can have a more in-depth conversation as to why not, but the moral of the story is big men have continued to make changes, and they're making strides in their games, and we're better for it. We're having a better game for it, which reminds me about Bam Adebayo. There's a big fight that goes on with basketball, and in particular when we talk about the NBA draft, and there are people that feel that the NBA draft is too much about potential, not enough about production, and often leads to teams taking players that they know aren't ready and can't possibly be ready by the time the NBA season starts. And therefore it becomes a very frustrating event for people who watch baseball, who watch hockey, and who watch football. And they don't understand that those teams are set up to take players that can produce today and not produce later on down the road. So potential is a word that people love to villainize, and often will lead to a frustrated view of the NBA draft. So Bam Adebayo is a perfect example. So coming out, there were questions about his development. There were questions about his offensive game. Many people thought he was raw. I mean, this isn't just your run-of-the-mill draft sites. This was universal. This was a consensus view of Bam. And now, 3 years later, we have one of the most promising big young men in the game today. And I don't know if he could have made these giant steps in college. I don't really know that. And I know people don't like to hear that because, I think people still view college as the best place for teaching, which I don't agree, because I think we have 330 plus colleges that are in Division I. Do you really believe that out of the 330 colleges in Division I, you really believe that there are 330 people more capable to coach kids than those that are in the NBA circles? Like, that's really what you believe? I don't know if I believe that. Let's say I wanted to be somewhat optimistic, okay? So you have 330 programs. Okay, we'll cut that in half, right? So we have 115 guys, right? So out of the 115 guys that are now left, you should probably, if you're being honest about this, okay? If you're being honest, you should cut it again, in which you have maybe at tops, 20 guys that really have the ability to help players progress at the same rate that they would in the NBA. And that's if you're lucky. We don't like to talk about this because we've villainized the NBA and we've villainized players going pro, and we don't like it because it messes with the perception that we have of college is this great time for young men and everything else. But let's be honest here. You don't have to worry about going to college, going to class. You don't have to worry about taking care of mom or any of these other things. When you go to the NBA, all you have to focus on is getting better. There's no outside, when you're in college and mom is being thrown out of her apartment because she got served eviction because she doesn't have money, or you have to deal with people trying to give you money, like street agents trying to give you money to get favorable with you when you do go pro. You have all these things happening, and we sit there and we say, oh, well, college is better. Well, I don't know if that's the case. I honestly don't know. We talk so much about how great Europe is at developing players, and I gotta be honest with you, part of the reason why Europe is great at developing players is because Europe doesn't do all this nonsense. Europe states, look, if you're going to college, you're going there for intellectual pursuits. Europe does not try to conflate the two and try to say, oh, well, not only are they athletes, but they're college athletes. Like Europe, they don't do that. If you're a football star, soccer for us in the States, you don't go to, these colleges really, unless you're like not a real prospect. You go pretty much to the real minor league pro teams, and you work on your skill to be a professional player. They don't really try to conflate the two. And we're the only ones that are sitting there trying to say, oh, well, not only are they able to do this, but they're able to do this too, because we have a system that we use and that we think is best. Well, I mean, honestly, I think the system is archaic, and we got to make some adjustments. But, I'm sorry to get on my tangent with that. But back to Bam. Undoubtedly one of the best prospects we have at the center position. He's going to continue to be just something special down the road. And it's going to be exciting to see. Which leads me to an article that was written by my good friend Mike DeCourcy. And I really mean it. Mike DeCourcy writes for the Sporting News. And let me tell you, he has an exceptional view on players, on the game of basketball. I really enjoyed talking to him. But he had this article that said the title was Latest Group of Rising Star Highlights Major Flaw with NBA Drafts Age Game. And basically in the article, he says that NBA scouts tend to look at players that are older with less excitement. And I think, yeah, he's probably right about that. And in it, he highlighted Eric Pascal and Cameron Johnson. Now, if you tuned into my Facebook page after the draft, I did commentary during the draft. Cameron Johnson was a guy that I told the Phoenix Suns, basically, that's a terrible pick. And it had nothing to do with Cameron Johnson, had nothing to do with Cameron Johnson's age. I think what we have to do when we look at the NBA draft, right, we're going for BPA. Now, BPA is best player available. It's the best way to look at the draft. It's the best way to handle the draft. You don't get put into the dogma of needs. You get put into the dogma of talent. I'm not even saying that the Phoenix Suns view. If the Phoenix Suns at the 11th pick really felt that Cameron Johnson was their guy, that was the best player for that pick was their guy. Like they really felt, they went through their draft board and they felt that Cameron Johnson was the best pick. If they really believe that, great. All for it. Go ahead and take him. Now here's my thing. I didn't care about Cameron Johnson's age. Yes, he's older than most prospects. He's 23 years old. My issue with Cameron Johnson had to do about where Phoenix took him. They took him 11th. Now, Phoenix, again, if they really feel that Cameron Johnson is their guy, that's fine. But part of being an NBA team and drafting players is to identify the field and what everybody else values. That's part of the thing here. What I'm saying is, if you're the Phoenix Suns and you say, man, Cameron Johnson is this high on our draft board, you know what? Looking at what everybody else is valuing pretty much, we could probably slide down in the draft 4 or 5 spots, make some trades, and still take him. They didn't do that. In a sense, they bought at a price value that was way higher. The cost basis of acquiring Cameron Johnson was way too high. Way too high. Case in point, and again, I'm not saying my mock draft is the end-all, be-all. Sure, there are a lot of people out there that do mock drafts. I've been doing this since 1988. There's a little bit of a science that goes behind it. Look, again, it is what it is. It's a mock draft. I'm not going to sit here and profess that my mock draft is the Bible of how prospects should be valued. But I really pride it on where the general consensus of talent kind of lies. I had Cameron Johnson going 27th in my mock. Obviously, there's definitely a range of buffing there. If, usually I like to do it within 3. So if I can get the guy within 3 spots, that's a pretty good hit for me. What I'm saying to you is there was no one that was going to take Cameron Johnson 11th, 12th, 13th, or 14th. Like, we know that. It's pretty certain he was going to be there. And again, anybody who works in this field, they'll tell you, everybody kind of knows where people are roundabout valued at. And every year there's a team that's going to reach, and that's fine. The difference is, are you reaching or are you really reaching? What I mean by that is, look, we all play fantasy sports, probably. If you're listening to me, maybe you play fantasy football, fantasy basketball, fantasy hockey, fantasy baseball, whatever. Point I'm making is, in most fantasy sports, they do a draft, right? And in the draft, you pick the players that you want for your team. Now, all of us know usually who's going what in the first round. We usually know first and second round where guys are roundabout valued at, right? Let's say you think Cam Newton is going to have a great year. Now, if you went into the fantasy football draft this year and you said, Cam, I'm telling you, Matt, I got a great feeling about Cam Newton. And, he's going to be a top 3 quarterback. Okay. And you're sitting there in the first round and you take Cam Newton. You just reached. You spent incredibly high draft capital on a guy that you probably could get in the 5th or 6th round in a standard 10-team fantasy football league. So what I'm saying is, if you're in the NBA and there are 30 teams, 60 picks, so you only have essentially 2 picks to really deal with here. You know that the field is valuing a guy a certain way. So what I'm saying is, if you think that the teams are valuing a guy in the 20s and you really want the guy, okay, take him in the teens. But if you're like the 11th or 10th pick, trade down, get more assets, get more pieces, get future draft picks, add on to yourself. Don't just take a guy 11th because you can, because that's silly. That's ridiculous. And why do that? You're not really helping yourself. Help yourself and then some. If you really feel that Cameron Johnson is going to be the next great shooter in the league, okay. If you really believe he's the number 1 guy left on your draft board, okay. I'm not sitting here saying Cameron Johnson is a bad pick. I'm saying Cameron Johnson's a bad pick at 11th because you wasted a lot of draft capital acquiring him because the rest of your competition didn't value him the same way. That's the bottom line. Your cost basis is incredibly high because you chose to take a guy that no one else valued that high. That's really all it is. That's really all it is. Case in point, Kevin Porter, USC. He goes 30th in the draft, 19 picks lower, and 4 years younger than Cameron Johnson. And guess what? Metrically and production-wise, he's almost matching what Cameron Johnson's doing this year. Now listen, that's neither here nor there. I like Cameron Johnson. I had him going 27th. I had Kevin Porter going 25th. So what I'm saying to you is, I was higher on Kevin Porter apparently than the rest of the league was because he went 30th. So what I'm saying to you is, okay, he goes 30th. If that's where you really believe he should be at, okay, take that guy. But understand something. you're killing your draft capital by spending really high on a guy. Eric Paschall, perfect example of a steal. I think I rated him 33rd in my draft. He goes, I believe he goes 41st. He goes the 41st. I had him 35th in my mock. Steal. Great pick. There was rumblings that he could have been a late first rounder. There was actually some rumblings and hats off. I forget who reported it. But there were some rumors that he might even go in the 20s. And I thought that was incredibly high. But look, Eric Paschall, one of the issues with him coming out was he was such a stable and constant player that, unfortunately, his value got somewhat diminished because, he played at Villanova, and I can't say during their title runs he was the best player there. Jalen Brunson, you had Dante DiVincenzo, you had Amari Spellman. I can't ever say that Eric Paschall was better than those guys. I do believe Eric Paschall had value, but do I think he was better than those guys? I don't honestly know. Again, I liked what I saw from him, but can I sit here and really tell you he was on that level? No, I honestly can't. So I think that kind of got in the way of his evaluation. And being 22 years old, sure, that's going to have some hit on your draft status. Sure it will. If people want to act like age doesn't matter, then they're doing themselves a disservice, period. Age does matter. And we sit there and we try to say that age doesn't matter. Age does matter. Because if Eric Paschall is 25 years old, or Zion Williamson, better yet, Zion Williamson, if Zion Williamson does everything he does, plays at Duke, and he's 25 years old, Zion Williamson's value is not going to be that high. And rightfully so. There is, whether people like to admit this or not, there is something to the idea of potential. And we have Bam Adebayo as a perfect example. Here's a guy who had time to develop and went pro and developed further skills. He didn't have those skills when he came out for the draft. If Bam Adebayo is 25 years old, the window of his progress is smaller. Let's not try to act like this thing called time doesn't exist. Time is all around us and is forever measuring. And for people to try to act like potential and time doesn't have any impact, it's crazy to me. I don't understand that at all, and I'm not even going to try to pretend like I do. Tyrese Haliburton is out for the season now. If you've been under a rock, he injured his wrist. So he got I believe he got a hairline fracture, landed on it very awkwardly. He's a guy that has moved up draft boards this year. And to tell you the truth, I'm not as high on him as other people are. I think he's a good talent. I could see him definitely as a top 15 draft pick. However, there is things about him that I do worry about. His ability to shoot off the dribble, his size, weight, athleticism, his mechanics. There are a lot of things about him that I'm not so sure about. And, this kind of dovetails into the conversation about LaMelo Ball and how people view him as a prospect as well. I don't look at LaMelo Ball as like some of these other people do, as the number one player in the class. I don't know if I believe that. And Tyrese Haliburton is kind of the same way. There are people out there that have him as a top 5 pick. I don't see that either. I like a lot of other guys more than Tyrese. Tyrese, first of all, you really got to worry about Tyrese's size. I mean, I'm not talking about height. I'm talking about the fact that he's 175 pounds and he does not have elite athleticism, and he's pretty stiff. He's a very stiff player. Lonzo Ball, for example, is a prime example of a tall point guard who still he's improved tremendously since his rookie year. But let's be honest, has Lonzo Ball really been that guy? Not really. He hasn't been the number 2 pick, really. If we're being honest, if we're not just crowning Lonzo Ball because it's Lonzo Ball and people have an affinity for his dad or they hate his affinity, taking all that away, just looking at Lonzo Ball value, Lonzo Ball has not lived up to his draft status yet. He just hasn't. Let's be real. Let's be honest. He was supposed to be Jason Kidd. That's what they said. I didn't believe it, and I have the post to prove it. I never thought he was Jason Kidd. I didn't ever understood why people were saying it. And I literally had people argue with me online telling me, oh, yeah, he's Jason Kidd. I'm like, how do you figure? Do you not remember Jason Kidd? Like, he's nowhere near Jason Kidd. So when I see these buzzwords with tall point guards, I get a little worried. When I see people tell me about their IQ, I get a little worried. When I see people telling me that their athleticism is underrated, I get a little worried, because those kind of buzzwords are death to NBA teams who draft them too early. They really are. Because you're sitting there and you're basically telling me by will alone, he is going to be good. Doesn't matter. All these other intangibles that we value, that we measure, that we plug into analytics and everything else, none of that matters. It just doesn't matter. He's just good. And that's the thing about Tyrese Haliburton. You know, where do you place him? Because if you're saying to me he's a top 5 pick, well, then you're saying that he has a chance to be an all-star. I don't see an all-star when I look at him. I don't see an all-star when I look at LaMelo Ball. I see a very good player, but do I see an all-star with LaMelo Ball? No. I think he'll be better. I think he'll be better than Lonzo Ball. I'll give him that. I think without a shadow of a doubt, LaMelo is the best ball brother. But as far as, do I think he's the number 1 talent in all of the draft? That's absolutely not the case at all. I mean, again, you know, I don't know what people value, but I know that they don't look at players the same way I do. And that's fine. Because when I said I wanted De'Aaron Fox over Lonzo Ball, I got people that, you know, laughed at me and everything else and said, oh, how could you do that? That's crazy. You're just basing this off one game. You know, fast forward 3 years later, where are those people now? Quiet. Got nothing to say. Now they knew Fox was going to be better. Yeah, okay. All right. I have my proof. I have it out. I was never a Lonzo Ball fan. I always had De'Aaron Fox above him as a point guard prospect. And I can tell you this right now with LaMelo Ball and Tyrese Haliburton. I think they're great players. I think they'll be very good players in the NBA. But the GM who takes them dangerously too high, that GM is going to have problems. Because if you take LaMelo Ball number 1 or number 2, you're basically stating that LaMelo Ball is going to be a franchise talent. And I don't think so. Like, people could, and this is the other thing too that's hilarious about the draft as well. A top 3 pick, no matter how you slice it, a top 3 pick is the projection that's a franchise talent. It really is. That's the projection. When you say that a guy isn't the number, if a guy is a top 3 pick and you're saying to me you don't know if he's a franchise talent, then you've already put holes in your theory from the get-go. Because literally, that's what you're saying. That's literally what you're saying. And if you don't believe me, look at Darko Milicic. He is sandwiched between LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony. 1984, Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, and sandwiched between them is Sam Bowie. Don't tell me that a top 3 player is not supposed to be a franchise player, because you're lying. That is where we're projecting. If you're telling me you're taking a guy number 3 overall or number 1 overall, number 2 overall, and you're telling me you don't think he's a franchise player, then this is either a ridiculously weak draft, or you just like him because you're trying to be contrarian and you really don't really have any science or facts to back up what you claim. That's the only thing I can contend with. I don't know what else. And listen, I'm not throwing shots at anybody, but every once in a while, people, websites, analysts, they like to have that guy of theirs, and they say, this is my guy. And they like to plug their guy, and they say that their guy is the best guy of them all. And then nothing happens. And then they're quiet. They never talk about it again. And listen, every draft site out here has a guy, okay? Including the famous ones. Believe it or not, they all do. And I can name them in spades. They all got them. They all got those guys that, weirdly enough, they were ultra supportive of. They had nothing negative to say about. And then when the players don't do well, they get quiet. Sure, give Draft Express all the credit in the world for putting Giannis on their mock first. But let me tell you something. For every player they put on their mock first, don't act like they haven't put guys in the top 5 that they don't even want to acknowledge, that aren't even in the NBA. Like, come on, let's be real. And every draft site's got that. I'm not saying they don't, but for people to sit there and try to act like there's not politics involved with some of this stuff, come on. Sure there is. Politics is in everything. So I figured it'd be a good time to do a little bit of NBA draft history. As many of you may not know, I'm an NBA draft historian. I am one of the only people that has researched the entire history of the NBA draft, a long, super long process that I started with the 1950 NBA draft and literally went through every single player, researched, cataloged, and recorded. The rule of thumb used to be it was 3 years of a draft in order to evaluate a draft. You waited 3 years later. With prospects being younger and you having overseas prospects that sometimes take a couple years before they come over, it really is now a lot more drawn out. I mean, you're 5, maybe 6 years now is really the rate it takes to really accurately capture a draft class. So the 2010 NBA draft is what I wanted to take a look at. And it's quite interesting because the top 10 players in this draft are Paul George, John Wall, and this is my order, by the way. So Paul George, I think, is the number 1 player in all of the 2010 NBA draft. He went 10th overall, definitely number 1. John Wall, I have as number 2. DeMarcus Cousins, number 3. Gordon Hayward, number 4. Derek Favors, number 5. Eric Bledsoe, number 6. Hassan Whiteside, number 7. Greg Monroe, number 8. Ed Davis, number 9, and Jeremy Lin, number 10. Now, you may be saying, that's great, Mac, but who do we really blow it on? Well, no problem, I got you. Evan Turner. Evan Turner went number 2. Wesley Johnson went number 4. Epe Udoh went number 6. Xavier Henry went number 12. And Craig Brackens went 21st. Those players represent the highest cost basis with less return. I don't like using the word bust because to get to the NBA draft level, it's hard to be a bust as a basketball player. So I like to use the word underperformed or, didn't match their projection. I think in looking at the 2010 NBA draft, I myself wanted to see where I got guys. So I have a mock draft from 2010. And it's been out on the internet for a long time. I'm not like some people who went in and changed my rankings and or my mock drafts years later. I didn't do that. This is truly where I had guys. So I had Paul George going 12th, John Wall 1st, DeMarcus Cousins 3rd. Gordon Hayward, I'm shockingly had really low in my mock, and I'm really shocked by that because I was a big Gordon Hayward fan. But I had him going 19. Derek Favors 5, Eric Bledsoe 22. I'm very proud of this selection, though. I had Hassan Whiteside in my mock draft going 9th, which let's just say at the time when my mock draft was done, I thought I was the slowest person in the world because he went 33rd. Greg Monroe, I went 6. I had 6. Ed Davis, I had 15th. And Jeremy Lin, I did not have on my mock draft. I scouted Jeremy Lin, and shamelessly, I liked what I saw, but I just didn't see him getting drafted. And unfortunately, I always bite myself. I read back on my notes and I see what did I miss with Jeremy Lin. And a lot of what's made Lin great, I have in my notes about the creativity and the ability to get to the basket. But for some strange reason, when he was at Harvard, I just did not see him as a draft prospect that was going to be selected in this top 60. In my mock draft, I had Turner going 2nd, Wesley going 4th, Epe Udoh going 13th, Xavier Henry going 10th, and Craig Brackens going 43rd. So there definitely was an idea that I was not in love with Craig Brackens or But I did think most of these other guys were going to be solid picks. So, look, it's a crapshoot. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you take into account that Jeremy Lin, undrafted player, literally ends as a top 10 player in the 2010 NBA draft. It's quite an accomplishment. Even I did not give Jeremy Lin that much credit, but literally when you look, he edges out guys like Trevor Booker, Ishmael Smith, who was another player that went undrafted, who we now know should have been drafted. He obviously edges out Turner, Johnson, Udo, Henry, Brackens, Elliott Williams. There are a host of guys that he definitely eked out. And the other surprising part of this was how good Greg Monroe's play has been throughout his career. He's a 20 PER player. That's his career average. Just to give you guys an idea of that, PER is player efficiency rating. 15 is the average, so anything above 15 means you're above average. Most all-stars tend to be in the 20s, and he averaged that, which I'm shocked because I didn't think he was that good. Definitely, this could be something where the analytics take a little bit of a hit, but he did also have, during his career, 49 win shares, which is higher than Hassan Whiteside, Eric Bledsoe, that I have above him, and higher than DeMarcus Cousins. But to DeMarcus Cousins' credit, he's been out with an injury. And certain guys like Gordon Hayward, I have fourth. I have him fourth because really he has had the 2 years it took him to recover from that brutal injury. It took him a whole season just to try to get back into things. This season, he's kind of back to where people, I think, expected him to be. He's a career 17.6 PER with 52 win shares. I think talent-wise, I think he's a top 5 guy. And Derek Favors also is another guy that, I don't think we give enough credit to. He's almost averaging a double-double right now for the Pelicans, but he doesn't get enough credit. And he's really been a very good I would say solid player for most of his career. I think that was pretty good. In terms of where would I rate this draft, I wouldn't say this draft was a bad draft, but I certainly wouldn't say this draft was a good draft. Injuries have definitely robbed this draft class. I mean, like I said, you have Gordon Hayward, you have DeMarcus Cousins, you have John Wall now. Paul George has been, injured. It took away some of the luster of this draft class. And in terms of all-stars, I mean, look, they definitely have about 5 all-stars, I would say. I mean, you have Paul George, you have John Wall, you have DeMarcus Cousins, you have Gordon Hayward, and 4 definite all-stars. And you kind of, I think there's a couple fringy guys like Whiteside and Bledsoe who have that ability. And more importantly, I think when we evaluate NBA drafts, I think we also have to give a lot more credit to role players. Unfortunately, I think people look at drafts as just, this guy was MVP, this guy was an all-star, that's all that matters. Because I think that's one of the major advantages that the 1984 draft has over the 2003 draft. Is the 1984 draft, I think, not only has the star power, but has an incredible assortment of role players that are so rich and so talented that they get discounted way too far. Prime example, I saw a sports writer who said he had he works for the Sporting News, and I'm not going to say this guy's name, but he had as one of the worst draft picks, he had Sam Perkins being drafted by the Dallas Mavericks, and that basically, because they skipped out on Barkley, that was a bad pick. Let me tell you something. Sam Perkins was a great draft pick for the Dallas Mavericks. Sure. Did they miss the mark grabbing Barkley? Sure, absolutely. Barkley went 5th. Sam Perkins went 4th. But I can tell you this right now. Sam Perkins is not chopped liver. This kid, you can tell he did not know the depth of value that Sam Perkins had for his career, and it really came out in his writing. Because to me, that is like one of the dumbest statements to make there, because Sam Perkins was great. He was a quality role player, like beyond quality. I mean, how do you call, like Otis Thorpe? Otis Thorpe goes later in that draft. Is Otis Thorpe a knock? Like, come on, like we got to be smarter about this. When we start looking at draft picks, if we're going to start calling guys like Sam Perkins and Otis Thorpe bad draft picks, like this is why I get a little vexed when people talk about the NBA draft and the history of it and literally have no concept on what they're talking about. They're just looking at numbers and saying, oh, this guy has no all-star appearances, this guy does, and therefore it's a miss. Like, come on. We got to do better than this. Okay? Period, point blank. Well, that's about all the time I have today. As you guys know, again, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. You guys know I appreciate it. Please continue to support and share, and I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.